Judith chapter 4. Campaign against Bethulia. The Israelites prepare to resist. Defensive preparations. When the Israelites living in Judea heard of everything that Holofernes, the commander-in-chief of King Nebuchadnezzar, had done to the nations, and how he had pillaged and destroyed all their temples, they were filled with unspeakable dread at his approach, and greatly concerned over the fate of Jerusalem and of the temple of the Lord their God. For they had just returned from exile a short time before, and only recently had the people of Judea been gathered together with the sacred vessels, the altar, the temple reconsecrated after their profanation. Therefore, they notified the entire region of Samaria, Kona, Beth-horon, Belmain, and Jericho, Choba and Asora, and the valley of Salem. The people of those areas established outposts on the summits of the high mountains, fortified their villages, and stored up food supplies from the recently harvested fields in preparation for war. Joachim, the high priest in Jerusalem at that time, wrote to the inhabitants of Bethulia and Bedomessaim, which is opposite Esdraelon, facing the plain near Dothan, ordering them to occupy the mountain passes, since they were the only means of access to Judea. Since the narrow approach would not allow more than 2 men to advance abreast of each other, there would be no difficulty in preventing the advance of the attacking forces. The Israelites carried out the orders issued by Joachim, the high priest, and by the Senate of the whole people of Israel in session at Jerusalem. Prayer and penance. At the same time, all the men of Israel cried out to God with great fervor, humbling themselves before him and fasting. They, together with their wives and children, their livestock, and every resident alien, hired laborer, and slave, wrapped themselves in sackcloth, and all the Israelite men, women, and children living in Jerusalem prostrated themselves in front of the temple, and with ashes on their heads they spread out their sackcloth before the Lord. They even draped the altar in sackcloth, and with one voice they prayed fervently, imploring the God of Israel not to allow their children to be carried off and their wives to be taken captive, the towns they had inherited to be destroyed, and their temple to be profaned and desecrated for the heathens to gloat over. The Lord heard their prayers and looked kindly on them in their distress, for the people fasted for many days throughout Judea and before the temple of the Lord Almighty in Jerusalem. Joachim, the high priest, and all the priests stood in the presence of the Lord and ministered to him. They wore sackcloth around their loins, and they offered the daily burnt offerings, the votive offerings, and the freewill offerings of the people. With ashes on their turbans, they cried out to the Lord with all their power, imploring him to look with favor on the whole of the house of Israel. A Council of War, Chapter 5. What people is this? Holofernes, the commander-in-chief of the Assyrian army, received the intelligence report that the Israelites had prepared for war, blockading the mountain passes, fortifying all the high peaks, and establishing barricades in the plains. Filled with rage, he summoned all the princes of the Moabites, the generals of the Ammonites, and the governors of the coastal regions. Tell me, you Canaanites, he demanded, what people is this that dwells in the hill country? What towns do they inhabit? How large is their army? Whence do they derive their power and strength? Who rules as their king and leads their army? Why have they alone of all the peoples of the west refused to come and meet with me? Discourse of Achior, the good pagan. Then Achior, the leader of all the Ammonites, said to him, My lord, if it pleases you, to allow your servant to speak, I shall provide you with the true facts about this people that lives nearby in the mountain district. Nothing that is untrue shall be spoken by the lips of your servant. This people is composed of descendants from the Chaldeans. At one time they settled in Mesopotamia because they refused to follow the gods of their ancestors who lived in Chaldea. Since they had abandoned the ways of their ancestors and worshipped the God of heaven, the God they had come to know, they were banished from the presence of the gods of their forefathers. As a result, they fled to Mesopotamia, where they dwelt for a long time. But their God commanded them to depart from that place where they were living and to migrate to Canaan. They settled there and acquired great wealth in gold and silver and vast herds of livestock. Later, when a severe famine afflicted the land of Canaan, they went down to Egypt, where they remained as long as food was available in abundance for them. There they grew into a great multitude, that their numbers could not be counted. So the king of Egypt turned against them and exploited them by forcing them to labor at brickmaking and reducing them to slavery. They besought their God, and he afflicted the whole land of Egypt with incurable plagues. When the Egyptians expelled them, their God dried up the Red Sea before them and guided them along a route to the Sinai and the Kadesh Barnea. They drove out all the inhabitants of the desert, settling in the land of the Amorites. And by their power they exterminated the entire population of Heshbon. Then they crossed over the Jordan and took possession of the whole hill country. They drove out before them the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Shechemites, and all the Girgashites. And they dwelt in the mountains for a long time. As long as they did not sin before their God, they enjoyed prosperity. For their God, who loathed wickedness, was with them. However, whenever they strayed from the path he had prescribed for them, they suffered tremendous losses for many battles and were led away as captives to foreign countries. The temple of their God was razed to the ground, and their towns were occupied by their enemies. But now that they have returned to their God, they have come back from the lands where they had been scattered, have again taken possession of Jerusalem, where their temple is located, and have settled in the mountain region that was uninhabited. So now, my Lord and Master, if this people has committed the fault of sinning against their God, and if we can ascertain the accuracy of the report, then we can go up and conquer them. But if they are a nation that is guiltless, then, my Lord, it would be better for you to leave them alone. For their Lord and God will protect them, and we will then become the laughingstock of the whole world. Reaction of the pagans. When Achior had finished with his recommendations, all the people crowding around the tent began to murmur. The officers of Holofernes and all the inhabitants of the seacoast of the Moab demanded that he be cut to bits. We are not afraid of the Israelites, they said. They are a powerless people who are incapable of withstanding a strong attack. Therefore, let us move forward, Lord Holofernes. Your great army will swallow them up.